Dean Martin was halfway through the chorus of That's Amore when the bride in the white dress at the center table put both hands over her face and started crying, and the groom in the black tuxedo stood up and shouted across the laughter, "Stop the music." Remember, Dean heard those three words cut through the applause and knew instantly that this wasn't just a disrupted wedding reception, because the way he responded in the next 30 seconds would either mark him as a man who cared about people more than performance, or as someone who valued the show above everything else, and everyone in that room was about to see which one he really was. The Sands showroom was electric. That Friday night, May 1965, white tablecloths glowing under stage lights that painted everything in warm gold and amber, champagne glasses catching the light like tiny stars scattered across tables in constellations of celebration, and the air smelled like expensive perfume and fresh-cut wedding cake and gardenias from the floral centerpieces, and that particular kind of joy that comes from celebration mixed with good champagne and live music, and the feeling that this night would be remembered forever. Dean was in his element, writing the melody of one of his signature songs with the ease of someone who'd sung it 10,000 times and still found new life in it. Every performance, voice smooth and playful, like honey poured over gravel, the orchestra swinging behind him with horns bright and brassy, drums keeping that perfect dance rhythm that made people want to move in their seats, bass walking underneath like a heartbeat, and the crowd was with him completely, 300 people singing along to the When the Moon Hits Your Eye Like a Big Pizza Pie part, faces bright with happiness and alcohol, and the glow of being exactly where they wanted to be. Then he saw her. She was sitting at a large round table, right in the middle of the room, maybe 20 feet from the stage, and she was unmistakable, even in the dim lighting between spotlights. White wedding dress, full and elegant with layers of silk and tulle that spread around her chair like a cloud, lace sleeves that came to delicate points over her hands, a sweetheart neckline that showed her collarbones, and the thin silver chain with a pendant that caught the light when she moved, veil pulled back from her face and pinned into her dark hair, which was swept up in an elaborate updo with small white flowers and baby's breath woven through it like she'd stepped out of a magazine. And she was crying. Not polite tears that you could dab away with a tissue, not happy tears that came with smiling. Deep, shaking sobs that made her whole body tremble like she was being torn apart from the inside, shoulders hunched forward and drawn in like she was trying to make herself smaller, hands pressed to her face like she was trying to hold herself together and failing, like she was trying to catch something that was spilling out of her and couldn't be stopped. The groom was beside her, standing now, tall and broad-shouldered, in a black tuxedo that fit him perfectly, and his face was red, jaw tight, and he was staring right at Dean. Then he cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, loud enough to carry over the music and the singing, "Stop the music." The room went quiet. Not gradually, the way conversations die down, when something interesting happens, instantly, like someone had thrown a switch and turned off all sound, except the echo of that shout, bouncing off the walls and ceiling, and fading into nothing. The orchestra faltered, one instrument at a time dropping out, first the piano, then the bass, then the horns, until there was just the drummer hitting one last cymbal that rang out and died, and then silence, and the sound of the bride crying, soft and broken and terrible. 300 people froze mid-motion, mid-laugh, mid-sip, champagne glasses, halfway to lips, forks suspended over plates of wedding cake, faces turning toward the center table, with expressions shifting from joy to confusion, to concern in the space of a single heartbeat. Dean's hand tightened on the microphone, knuckles going white. His smile stayed in place, out of pure muscle memory, that performer's smile that he could hold through anything. But his eyes were already moving, scanning the table, reading the situation the way you read a sentence, taking in every detail, and processing it faster than thought. Write in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? And what time is it right now? Dean set the microphone back on the stand, the motion smooth and deliberate and gentle, like he was setting down something fragile, and stepped forward to the edge of the stage. The stage lights were hot on his face, bright enough that he had to squint slightly to see into the darker parts of the room, but he could see the center table clearly enough. He didn't look at the groom yet, he looked at the bride. Her face was buried in her hands, her whole body curved inward around her pain, like she was protecting something vital, mascara running in dark streams down her cheeks and dripping onto the white tablecloth in little black dots, and the people sitting around her at the table, other couples in formal wear, who had to be wedding guests, bridesmaids in matching lavender dresses and groomsmen in black tuxedos that matched Robert's, were frozen between wanting to comfort her and not knowing what to do, some reaching toward her with hands that stopped mid-air, some looking at each other with helpless expressions, some staring down at their plates like they could wish themselves invisible. Dean could see champagne glasses still full and sweating condensation onto the tablecloth, wedding favors scattered on the table, little white boxes tied with silver ribbon, a small white card propped up against a candle that probably had the couple's names printed on it, in elegant script, Sarah and Robert, and a date that should have been the happiest day of their lives. "Hey," Dean said, voice gentle, projecting just enough to be heard without the microphone. "What's going on?" The groom looked at him, and Dean could see the man's eyes were wet too, but his face was twisted with something Dean recognized immediately. Not anger, not rage, desperation. The look of someone who'd been trying to hold something together and just watched it fall apart in front of everyone they knew. "This is our wedding reception," the groom said, and his voice was cracking on every other word, breaking up like static on a bad radio signal. "We got married this afternoon. 3 o'clock ceremony at the chapel, just family and close friends. And it was beautiful. Everything went perfect, and I thought..." He stopped, swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing in his throat, and Dean could see him fighting to keep control. "I thought bringing her here tonight would make her happy. This was supposed to be a surprise. She loves you, Mr. Martin. She's listened to your records since she was a kid. She has every album. She knows every word to every song. And I thought if I could bring her here, if she could see you perform live on our wedding night, it would be the perfect end to the perfect day. But she won't stop crying and I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this." Dean's chest tightened. He looked at the bride again, at the way her whole body was shaking, at the way the guests around her were sitting with their hands in their laps, helpless and uncomfortable, and at the way the rest of the showroom was staring at this table like it was a car crash they couldn't look away from. "What's her name?" Dean asked. "Sarah," the groom said. "Sarah Thompson. My name's Robert." "Okay, Robert," Dean said. He came down off the stage, shoes clicking on the hardwood floor, and the crowd watched him walk toward the center table, like they were watching something sacred and terrible at the same time. Dean pulled out the chair next to Sarah and sat down. The groom sat back down too, slowly, like he was afraid any sudden movement might make things worse. Dean leaned toward Sarah and said, quietly enough that the microphone wouldn't pick it up, "Sarah, hey, look at me." She didn't move. Dean waited. He didn't rush her. He just sat there, hands folded on the table, while 300 people held their breath. Finally, after what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds, Sarah lowered her hands. Her face was wrecked, red eyes, black mascara streaks, lipstick smudged at the corners, and she looked at Dean with an expression that broke his heart. "I'm so sorry," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I ruined everything." "You didn't ruin anything," Dean said. "Talk to me. What's wrong?" Sarah looked at Robert, then back at Dean, and her face crumpled again, like paper being crushed in a fist. "My father was supposed to walk me down the aisle today. He was supposed to give me away and dance with me at the reception and make a speech about how he remembers when I was born and how proud he is. He died 3 months ago. Heart attack. He was only 58. He was fine one day, laughing at dinner, telling stories, and then the next morning he was gone, just gone. And I thought I could do it without him. I thought I'd cried enough. I thought I'd processed it. I thought I was okay. But then we got here tonight, and you started singing, and that's her voice broke completely, dissolved into nothing, and she had to stop and breathe and try again. That's the song he used to sing to me when I was little. Every night when he tucked me in, he'd sit on the edge of my bed and sing it, making all the hand gestures, being silly, making me laugh. And I can't stop thinking about how he should be here tonight. And he's not. He's never going to meet Robert. He's never going to know his grandchildren. He's just gone. And I have to keep living like that's okay. And it's not okay. It's not. Dean felt like someone had punched him in the stomach, knocked all the air out of his lungs and left him gasping. He looked at Robert, who was staring at his new wife with his own tears starting to fall, now running down his cheeks and dripping off his jaw. And at the guests around the table, some of whom were crying now too, dabbing at their eyes with napkins, and at the rest of the showroom where people were starting to understand what they were witnessing, where the mood was shifting from confusion to something deeper and more sacred, where 300 strangers were becoming witnesses to someone's most private pain made public. Look, here's what you need to know about moments like this. When someone's pain becomes public, when their private grief spills out in front of strangers in a way they never intended, in a way that makes them vulnerable and exposed and raw, there's a choice everyone in that room has to make. You can look away and pretend it's not happening, avert your eyes and go back to your drink and your conversation like nothing's wrong. You can judge them for making a scene, for disrupting your nice evening with their messy emotions and their inability to hold it together. Or you can acknowledge that grief doesn't care about timing or appropriateness, or what's convenient for the people watching, and you can meet them where they are with compassion instead of embarrassment, with empathy instead of judgment, with the understanding that any one of us could be in that chair someday, crying in front of strangers, because the weight of what we've lost is too heavy to carry alone anymore. Dean chose compassion. "Sarah," Dean said, and his voice was gentle but firm, the voice of someone who'd been where she was, and knew that sometimes you needed someone to pull you out of the dark. Your father would be so proud of you today. You know that, right? He'd be proud that you're here. He'd be proud that you found Robert. He'd be proud that you're still standing even though your heart is breaking. She shook her head violently. He never got to see me in my dress. He never got to meet Robert. He never got to know that I found someone who makes me laugh the way he used to make me laugh. He never, but he knew you were going to have this day," Dean interrupted, leaning closer, his voice dropping lower, so only she and Robert, and maybe the people immediately next to them could hear. He knew it was coming. He knew you'd find someone who loves you, and he knew you'd be beautiful, because you've always been beautiful to him, from the day you were born until the day he died. And I guarantee you, wherever he is right now, whatever comes after this life, he's watching, and he's happy. He's happy you found love. He's happy you're moving forward. And he doesn't want you to spend your wedding night crying. He wants you to celebrate. Sarah stared at him, and something in her face shifted, not fixed, not healed, but something cracked open just enough to let a little light in. "You think so?" "I know so," Dean said. "And you want to know how I know? Because I lost my mother when I was young. And every big moment in my life, every time I step on a stage or sing a song or do something that matters, I feel her there. Not physically, but in here." He tapped his chest. "Your father's here tonight, Sarah. I promise you that." The tears were still falling, but Sarah nodded. And this time, when she cried, it looked different. Less like breaking and more like releasing. Robert reached over and took her hand, and she held on tight. Dean stood up, looked at the table, and said, "You folks mind if I borrow your bride for a minute?" The guests shook their heads, and Dean offered his hand to Sarah. She looked at him, confused, and then at Robert, who nodded. She stood up, careful with her dress, and Dean led her toward the stage. The room was completely silent. You could hear the air conditioning. You could hear people breathing. Dean helped Sarah up onto the stage, which took a minute because her dress was long and full and she was in heels that kept catching in the fabric, and he had to hold her hand steady while she climbed the 3 steps, careful and slow, and then he turned to the bandleader and said, "From the top, the song we were just doing, but slower this time, wedding tempo, make it gentle." The bandleader nodded, understanding immediately what Dean was asking for, and the orchestra started playing again, but different now, soft and gentle and sweet, the horns muted and warm, the drums barely there, just a whisper of rhythm, the piano carrying the melody with light touches that floated through the room like feathers. Dean picked up the microphone and started singing, but this time, he wasn't singing to the room, he was singing to Sarah, and Sarah stood there on the stage in her wedding dress, hands clasped in front of her like she was praying, tears still streaming down her face but slower now, and she listened, really listened, like she was hearing the song for the first time, like she was hearing her father's voice in Dean's voice, like she was 6 years old again, and safe in her bed, and nothing bad had happened yet. When Dean got to the chorus, he held out his hand to her, palm up, inviting, and said, "Sing with me. Come on. You know this." She shook her head, panicked. "I can't. My voice, I can't." "Yes, you can," Dean said. And his voice was warm and encouraging, and completely certain. "Your father taught you this song, right? So sing it. Sing it for him. Let him hear you." Sarah's mouth opened, trembling, and no sound came out at first. Just air, just the shape of words, with no voice behind them. And then, quietly, so quietly the audience in the back had to lean forward and strain to hear, barely louder than a whisper. She started singing along. Her voice was shaky and broken and imperfect, cracking on some of the words, but it was there, and it was real, and it was hers. Dean smiled, that genuine warm smile that reached his eyes and made people feel safe, and kept singing with her, his voice carrying hers, supporting it, and slowly, so slowly you could watch it happen like dawn breaking. Sarah's voice got stronger, not loud, but steadier, more solid, and by the time they hit the second verse, she was actually smiling through her tears, is really smiling, and the audience started clapping along, soft and rhythmic and careful, not wanting to overpower the moment. And then they started singing too, 300 voices joining in, and suddenly the whole room was singing the song with Dean Martin and a bride in a wedding dress on stage, and it was beautiful and terrible and perfect all at once. Wait. Before we move forward, you need to understand what just happened here. Dean didn't fix Sarah's grief. He didn't make her father's absence disappear. What he did was give her a moment of connection, a bridge between her pain and her joy. And he did it in front of 300 witnesses who would remember this for the rest of their lives. That's not magic. That's empathy. That's choosing to be human instead of professional. When the song ended, the room erupted. Applause so loud it felt like the walls were shaking. People standing up, some of them crying openly, and Sarah stood on that stage and looked out at all those faces and smiled, a real smile, messy and imperfect and beautiful. Dean walked her back to her table, and Robert stood up and hugged her, and then he turned to Dean and said, "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you." "Take care of her," Dean said. "That's all the thanks I need." Dean walked back to the stage, picked up the microphone and looked at the crowd. They were still standing, still applauding, and Dean let it go on for a moment before he held up one hand. All right, sit down. You're making me look good." Laughter rippled through the room, and people started sitting. Dean waited for the noise to settle, and then said, "I've been doing this a long time, folks, and I've learned that sometimes the show isn't about the show. Sometimes it's about the people in the room, and tonight we got to be part of something real. So let's raise our glasses to Sarah and Robert. May they have a long and happy life together." The room raised their glasses, and Dean raised his, and everyone drank, and the night went on. But when Dean walked off stage after his set an hour later, bow tie loosened and tuxedo jacket slung over his shoulder, the first thing he did was ask the stage manager if Sarah and Robert were still in the building. They were, sitting at the hotel bar in a quiet corner away from the main casino floor, nursing drinks and talking quietly with their heads close together, her veil removed now and her hair starting to come loose from its pins, his bow tie undone and hanging around his neck. Dean walked over, shoes silent on the thick carpet, and they both looked up when they saw him approaching, and their faces lit up. "I just wanted to check on you," Dean said, sliding onto the bar stool next to them. "Make sure you're okay. Make sure that wasn't too much." Sarah stood up so fast, she almost knocked over her drink, and she hugged him, arms tight around his shoulders, face pressed against his jacket, and when she pulled back, her eyes were red but clear. "I can't believe you did that. I can't believe you let me sing with you in front of all those people. I can't believe you didn't have to do any of that. You could have just kept singing and ignored us, and nobody would have blamed you." "You earned it," Dean said. "You got up there when it would have been easier to stay in your seat." "I don't know if we can ever repay you," Robert said. Dean shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, but do me a favor. When you have kids someday, tell them about their grandfather. Keep his memory alive. That's how we honor the people we lose." Sarah started crying again, but this time she was smiling too, and she nodded. "I will, I promise." Dean left them at the bar holding hands and went back to his dressing room, a small space with cream-colored walls, and a mirror ringed with lights that were too bright and showed every line in his face. He sat down on the leather couch that had seen better days, springs poking through in places, and loosened his bow tie completely, pulled it off and tossed it on the side table next to an empty glass. He poured himself a drink, scotch from the bottle that was always there, and downed it in one burning swallow. His hands were shaking, not from fear or adrenaline or anything like that, from something else, from the weight of knowing that what had just happened on that stage was bigger than any song he'd ever sung, bigger than any award or headline or review, and from the terror of knowing how easily it could have gone the other way, how easily he could have chosen wrong, chosen performance over person, chosen the safety of the spotlight over the risk of real human connection. Notice this. Compassion isn't something you plan or rehearse. It's not something you learn from a book. It's a reflex, instant and automatic, and it either kicks in or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you spend the rest of your life wondering what kind of person you really are. Dean's compassion had kicked in tonight, but he knew himself well enough to know there were nights when it hadn't, when he'd been too tired, or too drunk, or too focused on the performance to see the person in pain right in front of him. There was a knock on the door. Dean said, "Come in." His manager, Morty, stepped inside. "That was incredible, Dean. Everyone's talking about it. The hotel manager wants to do a press release. Human interest story. Dean Martin sings with crying bride. It could be huge." "No," Dean said immediately. Morty blinked. "What?" "No press release. No story. That moment was for Sarah, not for publicity." "Dean, this could be great for your image. People love this kind of—" "I said no, Morty," Dean said, and his voice was firm. "That girl just shared the worst day of her life with a room full of strangers. I'm not turning it into a headline." Morty stared at him for a second, then nodded slowly. "Okay, no press release. Thank you." Morty left, and Dean sat alone with his drink, and thought about Sarah's father, whoever he was, and about his own mother, and about all the people who should be at the celebrations but aren't, and about how life just kept moving forward, even when you wanted it to stop. The next night, Dean was back on stage at the Sands. Same showroom, same songs, But when he got to That's Amore, he paused before starting and said, "I'm dedicating this one to all the fathers out there who taught their daughters to love music." And he sang it, and the crowd sang along. And nobody in that room except Dean knew why he'd said it, but that was okay. Some things didn't need to be explained. Remember this: the moments that define us aren't always the big dramatic ones. Sometimes they're quiet. Sometimes they're a choice to sit down next to someone who's crying instead of walking away. Sometimes they're giving up the spotlight so someone else can feel seen. And sometimes they're refusing to turn someone's pain into your profit. A week later, Dean received a letter at the Sands. It was from Sarah and Robert, thanking him again, telling him how much that night had meant to them, and including a photo from their wedding, where Sarah was smiling and holding a bouquet. Dean put the photo in his wallet and carried it with him for many years, not because he wanted credit, but because it reminded him of why he did this job in the first place. The months went by, seasons changed, and Dean kept performing, kept singing, kept making people laugh and cry, and feel real things. And every now and then someone would come up to him after a show and say, "I heard you helped a bride at a wedding reception once," and Dean would smile and change the subject, because that story wasn't his to tell. But the people who were there that night, the 300 witnesses who saw Dean Martin sit down next to a crying bride and choose empathy over spectacle, they told the story. They told their friends, their families, their kids and grandkids, and the story grew and spread and became part of the legend of who Dean Martin was when the lights were on, and when the spotlight was brightest, and when the choice between performance and humanity was staring him in the face. And every time Dean sang That's Amore after that night, somewhere in his mind, he was singing it for Sarah, and for her father, and for everyone who'd ever lost someone and had to keep celebrating anyway. If you want to hear what really happened the night Dean stopped the show, because someone in the front row whispered something to him that changed the rest of the evening, tell me in the comments.